Fans watched The Amazing Dr. Pol for years, not only because of the animals but also because of him, his grit, his wisdom, his nonsense Dutch charm, and that deep love he had for every creature that walked, flew, or limped through his clinic doors. I was 12 years old when the local veterinarian picked me up to deliver piglets at my brother's, and after he brought the little piggies home, I told my mother I would like to become a veterinarian. I've never been sorry about that. Then, however, something altered. An accident happened to Dr. Pol. What actually took place that fateful day? By the time you finish watching this movie, you will not only know the truth, but you will also realize why there might never be another veterinarian like the amazing Dr. Pol in the world. Dr. Pol's early life and career. The adventure of John Harm Pol is the type of tale that develops, grows, and surprises you at every stage. He came into the world amid expansive green fields, the clatter of barn doors, and the soft mooing of cows in the early morning hours of September 4, 1942, in the sleepy village of Wateren in Drenthe, Netherlands. He grew up with a lot of chores, hand-me-downs, and more than his share of animal encounters, because he was the youngest of 6 children. The dairy farm where his family lived was more than just a place to live. There, life revolved around animals of all sizes. Lessons were learnt the hard way, and responsibility was instilled at a young age. Sheep, chickens, pigs, dairy cows, and whatever else that happened to fall into their care. Here on this farm, Jan Harm, now more often known as Dr. Pol, found what would become his forever obsession. When Asay went into labor and required assistance delivering her piglets, he was only 12 years old. He moved forward. Consider that. He was just a teenager when he was thrust into a situation that would influence the rest of his life. A seed was sown by that one encounter. Who would have thought that the youngster who brought pigs into the world would become so famous? What if all you've worked so hard to achieve may be destroyed in a single unplanned moment? For Dr. Pol, that is precisely what occurred. The man we all looked up to vanished from the public eye after one terrible accident. However, what actually took place that day? Was it simply terrible luck? Or was it more profound? Stay with us because you won't be able to express the truth about this accident. Then, in 1961, things took a surprising turn. A high school exchange program brought Hall to Mayville, Michigan. No one could have imagined how significant that year in the United States would turn out to be. It was there, not just because of the exposure, the new culture, or even the rural existence that brought back memories of his native land. He got to know Diane Dalrymple, the young lady who would eventually become his wife and his lifetime companion. Pol enrolled at Utrecht University, one of the best universities in the Netherlands. After he returned, he turned his boyhood calling into a career in 1970, after earning a degree in veterinary medicine, which was no small accomplishment. The narrative takes yet another dramatic turn in 1971. He returned to the United States as an immigrant. He was more than just curious this time. He had a job to launch and a family to raise. He moved to Harbor Beach, Michigan, with Diane. Dr. Pol then committed himself to working in a veterinary clinic that specialized in large farm animals for the following 10 years. The days were long, and the work wasn't glamorous. However, he was familiar with this type of medication. In the fields, knee-deep in muck and dirt, he felt at ease while assisting the animals that kept rural America functioning. However, Pol and Diane thought it was time to take a chance. After 10 years of working for someone else, they relocated to Weidman, Michigan, in 1981. With interest rates averaging 20%, that's right. They didn't let the difficulty of starting a new company deter them. They began modestly, quite little. A modest space in the corner of their carport served as their first clinic. Yes, just one room. Just tenacity, knowledge, and the drive to work harder than anybody else. No expensive gear or eye-catching signs. Is operating a veterinary practice out of a garage feasible? But they did it that way. Their practice, Hall Veterinary Services, started to expand as the years went by. They gained the community's trust gradually but steadily. They eventually managed to buy a plot of land next door and erect a double-wide trailer to act as the clinic. They had it, even though it wasn't much. Although the exterior of that trailer may not have been particularly stunning, what was taking place inside was truly amazing. Dairy cattle accounted for around 80% of Dr. Pol's activity at the time. Horses, dogs, kittens, and anyone else in need were the remaining 20%. Over time, however, the balance changed. Dr. Pol adjusted to the changing rural landscape of Michigan and the disappearance of family farms. He has always performed that task well. He is not ostentatious, but pragmatic. Although it may not always be textbook perfect, His approach to veterinary medicine is effective. He refers to it as veterinary common sense. Simple care based on what he had learnt back in the 1970s. Nothing ostentatious. No needless procedures. Serving clients is a requirement of being a veterinarian. According to a statement made by Dr. Paul, he values integrity, diligence, and treating others as he would like to be treated. And it was evident. His small garage practice expanded into something massive over the course of the following 40 years. Eventually, it treated hundreds of thousands of animals and serviced over 25,000 clients. Isn't that amazing? Thousands of patients from around Michigan, from a room in his garage. What's really amazing, though, is this. As the practice expanded and his name spread throughout the nation, Dr. Paul never lost sight of his origins. Boardrooms weren't what he traded in his boots for. He remained firmly established in his rural neighborhood, continuing to make farm calls and rise before the sun to tend to a sick cow or assist a goat in giving birth. He may have eventually discovered fame, but that didn't alter who he was. At his core, he was and remains a Dutch farm lad. He is realistic, unflappable, and devoted to the people and animals in his immediate vicinity. How the amazing Dr. Paul became a popular television character. The amazing journey of Dr. Paul, from a small-town veterinarian in Weidman, Michigan, to a well-liked national television personality, didn't start with a marketing effort or a Hollywood studio. It started with a son who only thought his father was unique. It all began when Dr. Paul's son, Charles Paul, decided to pursue a career in entertainment instead of veterinary medicine. Charles was proposing concepts for reality shows and mingling with executives at Nickelodeon in Los Angeles when he received a piece of advice that would transform his life. Look for someone who is bigger than life. Suddenly, a thought flashed into his head. He was not exaggerating when he told his partners, as he subsequently said, "The largest character I have ever met in my life is my father." His father had a demanding, dramatic, erratic, and emotionally charged job. The perfect combination for an engaging TV program. Well, what was Charles up to? He didn't wait for his dad's potential to be magically recognized by a studio. He assembled a small crew in 2010, just two pals and a cameraman, and traveled back home to shoot what would turn out to be a rough version of the show. Dr. Paul, who was always a straightforward and active veterinarian, had a clear memory of that period. He arrived with a cameraman and two friends, he added. They collected an incredible 27 hours of footage in a single week in May, filming all they could. They produced a carefully prepared 4-minute pitch DVD from all of that content. And what do you know? It was successful. The excerpt caught the attention of National Geographic Wild. They sensed the potential in it, not just liked it. A production crew was dispatched to Weidman shortly after. The wheels of something far larger suddenly started to turn. But let's face it, if people don't relate to your ideas, they can fail. Why, therefore, did people fall in love with the amazing doctor across the nation, and then the world? Paul? What made this unscripted program about farm animals, emergency room visits at odd hours, and a straightforward veterinarian so popular? Charles believes that there is a straightforward yet potent solution: nostalgia. Despite never having experienced it as children, it's a part of life that many people yearn for. He clarified. Seeing someone who truly cared about animals and wasn't scared to get dirty or stay up all night if it meant saving a life was reassuring and grounding. From the start, Dr. Paul was extremely clear about one thing: there was nothing staged in the show. We do what you see when we work with animals. He claimed that nothing is done for the camera. In an era when a lot of reality TV appeared staged, that transparency was uncommon. His style gave the program a welcome sense of realism. It wasn't a show you were seeing. You were observing life. And viewers of all ages found that genuineness to be poignant. The series wasn't just a moderate success, as the figures demonstrate. It had 7.6 times the average audience demand in the U.S. by April 2025, placing it in the top 8.6% of all shows in the country. Consider how many high-budget dramas and ostentatious comedy would be outperformed by an unscripted series about a country vet. The program educated as well as entertained. These were not merely touching tales. Educators nationwide started utilizing them to teach large animal medicine, particularly to kids participating in organizations like Future Farmers of America and FFA. These were authentic case studies that provided young people with an understanding of the true meaning of animal care, particularly in rural areas. When a show has the ability to teach you something new while also touching your emotions, isn't that something? However, an incredible amount of work went into each well-executed 40-minute episode. The process of filming was demanding, even taxing. The crew would spend a week filming roughly 100 hours of material for a single program. Furthermore, this did not occur occasionally. Every year it occurred for roughly 8 months. Making Dr. Paul wasn't like making a travel documentary or even a sitcom in a studio. This was fast-paced, real-time, and frequently chaotic veterinary work. The man didn't hold off till the cameras were prepared. We've learned to stay alert at all times, since Dr. Paul is too busy to wait for the crew. One crew member acknowledged. They even developed a system where each crew member had GPS trackers on their smartphones just to keep up with him. It's interesting to note that only roughly 10% of the cases from the clinic were actually broadcast. In order to preserve the privacy of customers and their pets, the production crew had to carefully select stories that were both entertaining and instructive. That required many hours of viewing footage, selecting significant moments, cutting them down, and piecing them together in a way that remained authentic and natural. No easy task. So maybe this is the question that remains. Isn't it really comforting to see someone simply carry out their work with expertise, care, and compassion, in a world where so much feels manufactured or flawlessly polished? Being famous wasn't Dr. Paul's goal. His only goal was to aid animals. However, Charles's vision has allowed his story, as well as the experiences of every cow, dog, horse, and pig he has ever treated, to become ingrained in the hearts of viewers worldwide. Additionally, new pressures began to arise as the cameras continued to film, and the expectations increased. Not all of them are welcome. The plot then takes a different course. For what took place behind the scenes? Well, the struggle was of a different sort, one to stay for the mounting demands in the background. A storm was subtly building behind the endearing moments of the incredible Dr. Paul. Where farm animals received recovery, owners found solace, and viewers found healthy amusement. Additionally, for some, it had been getting stronger ever since the show debuted. Millions of people worldwide watched to support Dr. John Paul, as he cared for everything from dogs with shattered legs to cows with twisted stomachs. An increasing number of veterinary experts watched with profound concern. A completely different emotion. Why? Because to them, what they watched on film was not just out of the ordinary, but also unacceptable. Many vets weren't only dubious from the start. They were startled. They also didn't hold back. Dr. Paul's medical practices were deemed horrible, disgusting, and even inexcusable by some. Now, how frequently do you hear one expert say that about another? It had nothing to do with territorial conflicts or small-time jealousy. It concerned what they believed to be a grave distortion of appropriate veterinarian care. These critics claimed that although the show's depiction of farm medicine was entertaining to the general public, it also carried the risk of normalizing dangerous, antiquated methods. Dr. Eden Myers, one of the most outspoken detractors, did not merely voice her dissatisfaction in private. She started a petition, a public campaign, and even a Facebook group advocating for the cancellation of the event. Consider the intensity of emotion required to launch such a movement. Nor was she by herself. People from all throughout the nation voiced their concerns about what they saw as risky precedents being set on national television. In comments on veterinary forums and professional websites. How did the show react to all of this then? The network that produced the incredible Dr. Paul was standing next to their celebrity. They characterized him as a man who had saved thousands of animals over the course of his lengthy career, and who had practiced common-sense veterinary medicine for more than 40 years. To be fair, a lot of viewers thought Dr. Paul was just a tough, hands-on rural vet who knew how to get the job done. The public's support for the network did not, however, significantly lessen the criticism. If anything, it continued to pick up speed. Then the legal issues arose. Because the law frequently follows closely behind professional wrongdoing and public pressure, things took a drastic shift in 2012. State officials in Michigan assigned Dr. Paul as on probation. The cause was a 2010 occurrence in which a pregnant dog's puppies sadly passed away while in his custody. Regulators called it carelessness. Nor was that an isolated instance. Another case surfaced in 2014. It was a Boston Terrier that had been struck by a car this time. Doctor officials claimed that Paul performed surgery without wearing the appropriate surgical uniform or monitoring gear. To put it another way, they believed that treatments that are considered necessary by modern veterinary standards were being neglected. Nevertheless, the legal process continued. By 2019, a decision sustained by the Michigan Court of Appeals had put Dr. Paul as once more on probation, this time for 2 different claimed cases of negligence. At the time, he was 77 years old. His defense team resisted, claiming that the Michigan Board of Veterinary Medicine had rendered unjust and capricious rulings. However, whether or not one thinks doctor, it became evident whether Paul had been harmed or should have been held responsible. The pressure was increasing. Such legal battles drag you down in addition to draining your income. They change how people think. And that type of scrutiny can have a lasting impact on a show that revolves around one man's reputation. So this is the question that keeps coming up. Can a well-liked public figure serve as a warning to some and a hero to many? Despite his charisma and warmth on TV, Dr. Paul became a lightning rod in the veterinary industry. He stood for custom, experience, and practical knowledge to some. Others saw him as a representation of all that contemporary veterinary care has attempted to abandon. However, the true story, the one that few discuss, is what all of this pressure, criticism, and acclaim did to him personally. Because his career wasn't the only thing that was impacted when a tragedy struck close to home. It was his heart. The ensuing emotional toll was profound but not captured on camera. In a moment, we will examine a facet of Dr. Few people have seen Paul. Stay put. Psychological effects following a family catastrophe. The Paul family, who are well known to millions of people, thanks to the hit television show The Incredible Dr. Paul, has gone through a lot of heartbreak, anguish that has transpired away from the production staff and camera lights. For all the joy and prosperity that have accompanied Dr. Despite Paul's popularity on television, there have been unexpectedly intense personal bereavement episodes. When Gregory Scott Butch, the loving husband of Dr. Paul's cherished daughter Kathleen, died in February 2016, following a grueling and draining fight with illness, sorrow struck close to home. Seeing a child experience the anguish of losing a spouse is intolerable for any parent. And it was more than simply the loss of a son-in-law for Dr. Paul and his wife, Diane. Over the years, they had shared birthdays, Sunday dinners, intimate chats, and many memories with a beloved family member who had passed away. It might be deafening to be without someone who used to fill the room with laughter, doesn't it? The family then suffered yet another heartbreaking blow from life, when they were still trying to put the pieces back together. Adam James Butch, their 23-year-old grandson, passed away unexpectedly in September 2019, just 3 years after Gregory's death. It was shocking, unsettling, and extremely upsetting that he died suddenly. How can one even begin to explain such a thing? What words can adequately express the anguish of losing a young man who hadn't even had a chance to completely embark on his future? Adam was a radiant light, full of promise, compassion, and zeal. His work with adolescents and involvement in health education mirrored the compassion that seemed to run in the family. The death of him rocked the Pohl family as a whole. Perhaps, though, no one was more affected by the loss than Dr. Paul. Well known for his stoicism and pragmatic approach to life and death, particularly as an experienced veterinarian who has experienced loss firsthand, Dr. Paul was always the one who kept things under control. But that shell was broken by Adam's death. He couldn't hide in quiet dignity because of the type of anguish he was experiencing. Rather, he came forward, sharing his pain in a way that was both uncommon and profoundly touching. It became evident to a guy who had dedicated his life to assisting people and animals alike that no amount of work experience could adequately prepare one for the heartbreak that comes with losing a grandchild. Usually firm and unflinching, his voice suddenly sounded sorrowful, and his career was viewed differently by people who had watched him for years. Not only the competent physician, but also the bereaved grandfather. The physical and professional difficulties that come with aging were added to the emotional burden. The work that had given Dr. Paul so much prominence and purpose started to demand more from him than his body could sustain by the time he was in his 80s. On the surface, filming a popular television program may seem glamorous, but the reality is much more demanding. He was shooting about 100 hours of video every week for about 8 months of the year. Not only is that exhausting, but it's almost superhuman. Is it possible for anyone to maintain such a schedule for an extended period of time? Naturally, his pace slowed as the years caught up with him. He had spent decades taking care of animals and their owners, after all. The erratic crises, the long hours, and the hands-on treatments. It was a profession based on both mental and physical fortitude. However, nobody is unbeatable. It got increasingly difficult for him to keep up with production deadlines as he grew older. What once took a few hours could now take a whole day. The producers needed to adapt. His rhythm has to be accommodated by the staff. Quick fixes and processes were no longer the only focus. Showing the journey of a man who had dedicated his life to helping others, and was now dealing with the same ticking clock that we all do, was the goal. Doesn't everyone have a connection to that? The sensation of slowing down and having to decide how best to spend your remaining time and energy. Nevertheless, in spite of all the suffering, the demanding workload, and the burden of loss, Dr. Paul remained dedicated to his patients, as well as to the audience members who found solace, amusement, and even motivation in his program. The terrible mishap that brought the event to a close. Over the lengthy and prosperous run of the incredible Dr. Paul, there was a constant concern for safety that lurked in the background. Something that the audience seldom ever noticed, but that the people working behind the scenes dealt with on a daily basis. How risky could it possibly be to film a veterinary show, you ask? However, as the people who worked on it would explain, it was more than just documenting adorable creatures or amazing healings. It involved being just inches away from massive, erratic farm animals, many of which were in agony, under stress, or simply in a panic. And there are actual, frequently disregarded risks associated with that kind of setting. Even in the beginning, safety was a priority, according to those involved with the manufacture. As Dr. Paul and his crew handled everything from challenging deliveries to last-minute procedures in barns, meadows, and occasionally even roadside ditches, cameras rolled. However, the program praised Dr. Paul's distinct old-school manner and straightforward approach to medicine. A whole other drama was unfolding just out of frame. Due to their lack of training in managing animals, the camera crew was subjected to dangerous situations all the time. They frequently found themselves in close proximity to hoofs that were kicking, horns that were swinging, and on multiple occasions, scared creatures that were attempting to run away were just as likely as the vet to get trampled. One crew member even remarked, "But when things took a very real and frightening turn, the jokes stopped." The most significant event took place during a standard beef cattle shoot. Following Dr. Paul into the field was meant to be simply another day, but what transpired had a profound impact on the team as a whole. An unruly and partially unrestrained beef cow escaped and collided with a crew member, knocking them down with full force. According to a production source, who was obviously still traumatized by the experience, "We've had a number of close calls with the crew, but the most dangerous was probably when one crew member got run down by a beef cow." To exacerbate the situation, the accident's video was lost. Thus, the incident was never broadcast. As a result, the majority of fans were unaware of the true gravity of the risks behind the scenes. Regretfully, that wasn't the only instance. There were numerous instances where crew safety was at jeopardy. One crew member was completely flipped over as a 300-pound calf escaped and ran right beneath them. In another instance, a barn post was completely shattered in two by a huge bull that was being castrated. Then there was the alpaca that almost broke a camera lens with its kick. Other memorable incidents included a 200-pound bloodhound that turned on its owner so violently that stitches were required, and frightened cows who jumped fences and overturned steel cages. These flukes weren't uncommon. Everyone involved knew they were part of the job. Why, therefore, were viewers unaware of any of this? Well, because rather of focusing on the blood, bruises, and very real risks that came with filming rural veterinary work, the episode was edited to highlight its fascinating, endearing, and occasionally humorous aspects. However, the team claims that the audience did not witness the actuality, which was far more dramatic. One employee stated, "The scenes you see on The Incredible Dr. Paul are legitimately dangerous. We're not merely teasing them for television." The network that broadcast the show, National Geographic Wild, was unable to ignore the growing number of these instances. Discussions over the viability of extending the show started behind closed doors. A thorough internal inquiry was secretly initiated by network officials, who thoroughly examined all safety procedures, incident reports, and growing concerns. What they discovered was disturbing. Red flags were triggered by more than simply the crew's risk. Dr. Even though he was now well into his golden years, Paul still had the same enthusiasm for charging into barns and wrestling pigs as he had 20 years previously. However, as everyone is aware, age has its limitations. As if that weren't enough, over time, certain members of the veterinary community had also become more vocal in their disapproval. While some experts voiced concerns about the absence of safeguards for the animals and humans involved, others questioned the medical procedures depicted on television. Everything started to pile up. A mix of production hazards, aging actors, industry criticism, growing insurance premiums, and even a minor change in the content that viewers were seeing. Therefore, the network took the tough choice, after giving it considerable thought. The Amazing Dr. Paul refused to go on. Naturally, the choice was not taken hastily. Dr. Paul had fulfilled his responsibility by doing everything in his power to ensure the crew's safety, even in the face of unforeseen circumstances. To be fair, the regulations have been preventing more severe injuries for years. However, sometimes the nature of the work itself is simply too unexpected, regardless of how cautious you are. The issue ultimately came down to protecting individuals, which is something that is sometimes overlooked in the pursuit of amazing television. Even though the show is no longer airing, its influence cannot be denied. We have now reached the conclusion of this video. Thank you for viewing. For more videos, please like, comment, and subscribe if you liked this one. Click the next video that appears on your screen to see more exciting stories.